The sound of the slap echoed through the quiet courtroom like a gunshot. One moment, Marcus Vance, the untouchable CEO of Vance Global, was screaming about his assets. The next, his hand had struck the face of his 8-month pregnant wife, sending her stumbling backward. The bailiffs froze. The lawyers gasped. But the most terrifying reaction didn't come from the gallery. It came from the bench. The Honorable Judge Margaret Sterling didn't call for order. She slowly stood up, her eyes burning with a rage that transcended the law. She looked at the billionaire and whispered 2 words that shattered his entire world. "Hello, son-in-law." The rain in Seattle was relentless that morning, hammering against the tinted windows of the black Bentley Mulsanne as it weaved through the downtown traffic. Inside, the air was colder than the storm outside. Elena Vance sat pressed against the leather door, her hands protectively cradling her swollen stomach. At 8 months pregnant, she looked fragile, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes telling the story of sleepless nights. She wore a simple, off-the-rack maternity dress, the only thing that fit her now, since her husband had canceled her credit cards 3 weeks ago. Next to her, scrolling through emails on a gold-plated tablet, was Marcus Vance. Marcus was the kind of man magazines called a visionary, and employees called a tyrant. At 38, he was the CEO of Vance Global, a tech conglomerate worth billions. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that lacked any genuine warmth. "Stop fidgeting," Marcus said without looking up from his screen. His voice was smooth, deep, and laced with irritation. "You look pathetic. Try to have some dignity when we walk in there. I don't want the press thinking I married a charity case, even if that is what you've become." Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm just nervous, Marcus. You know I don't want to do this. We could settle this privately. Please. For the baby." Marcus finally turned his head. His smile was thin and cruel. "Settle? Elena, darling, you misunderstood. I'm not here to settle. I'm here to destroy you. You tried to leave me. You tried to take my heir. Today isn't a negotiation. It's an eviction notice." He reached out and tucked a stray hair behind her ear. Elena flinched. "By noon," he whispered, "you will have nothing. No alimony. No custody. You'll be back in that trailer park I plucked you from, and I will be raising my son with someone who actually understands the value of my legacy." The car came to a smooth halt in front of the King County Superior Court. A swarm of paparazzi was already waiting, their cameras flashing like lightning. Marcus adjusted his Italian silk tie, checked his reflection in the window, and put on his public face, the charming, misunderstood billionaire. "Showtime," he muttered. He stepped out, buttoning his jacket, and ignored Elena as she struggled to pull herself out of the low car. She nearly slipped on the wet pavement, but Marcus was already 5 steps ahead, waving to the cameras, playing the victim. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was suffocating. Elena met her lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was young, overworked, and looked terrified. "Mrs. Vance," Sarah said, organizing a stack of messy papers, "I have to be honest. Marcus's legal team is aggressive. They filed motions to seal your medical records, and they have 3 character witnesses claiming you're mentally unstable." "I'm not unstable," Elena whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm scared. He hit me, Sarah. He locked me in the guest house for 2 days without a phone." "I know," Sarah said sympathetically, "but without proof. It's his word against yours, and his word is worth $4 billion. Across the hallway, Marcus was laughing with his legal team. His lead counsel was Arthur Pims, a man known in legal circles as, quote, the Viper. Pims charged $2,000 an hour and had never lost a high-profile divorce case. He specialized in gaslighting wives until they settled for pennies just to escape. "Is the judge secured?" Marcus asked Pims in a low voice. Pims smirked, checking his Rolex. "Judge Harrison called out sick this morning. Last-minute substitution. We got assigned to courtroom 4B. Marcus frowned. "Who is in 4B? "Doesn't matter." Pims waved a hand dismissively. "The law is on the side of the money, Marcus. It always is. Besides, we have the prenup. She signed it. She gets nothing if she initiates the separation. Good, Marcus said, glaring at Elena from across the hall. I want her broken, Arthur. I want her to regret the day she thought she could survive without me. A bailiff opened the heavy oak doors. All parties for Vance versus Vance, please enter. Elena took a deep breath, her hand resting on her belly. I have to be strong, she told herself. Not for me. For him. She felt the baby kick, a tiny reminder of why she was fighting. They filed into the courtroom. It was an old room, smelling of floor wax and old books. The gallery was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. Marcus took his seat with the confidence of a king ascending his throne. Elena sat huddled next to Sarah, looking small and defeated. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Margaret Sterling presiding. A door behind the bench opened. Marcus leaned back, bored. He expected some tired old bureaucrat who would be easily intimidated by his wealth. But when Judge Margaret Sterling walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She was a striking woman, perhaps in her early 60s, but with a posture so rigid she looked carved from granite. She wore the black robes not as a uniform, but as armor. Her hair was a shock of steel gray, pulled back into a severe chignon. She wore reading glasses perched on a sharp nose, and her eyes, a piercing, icy blue, scanned the courtroom with terrifying precision. She didn't look at the lawyers. She didn't look at the press. She sat down, arranged her files, and finally looked up. For a split second, her gaze landed on Elena. Elena, who had her head down, didn't see the flicker of emotion, shock, pain, recognition, that passed over the judge's face. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of judicial indifference. Be seated, Judge Sterling said. Her voice was low, raspy, and commanded instant silence. Arthur Pym's leaned toward Marcus. I don't know her, he whispered, sounding annoyed. She must be a transfer from the criminal circuit. Tough old bird by the looks of it. Handle her, Marcus hissed. Docket number 4922, Judge Sterling read. Vance versus Vance. We are here for a preliminary hearing regarding the dissolution of marriage and emergency custody orders. She looked over her glasses at the defense table. Mr. Pims, I see you have filed a motion to dismiss the plaintiff's request for spousal support. Yes, Your Honor. Pims stood up, buttoning his jacket. It is absurd. Mrs. Vance signed a prenuptial agreement 3 years ago, stating that, in the event of a divorce, she waives all rights to Mr. Vance's assets. Furthermore, we are filing for full sole custody of the unborn child on the grounds that Mrs. Vance is emotionally unfit. Elena let out a small, audible gasp. Liar, she whispered. Judge Sterling's eyes snapped to Pims. Emotionally unfit? That is a strong accusation, Counselor. The woman is 8 months pregnant, which makes her hormonal volatility even more dangerous. Pims said smoothly, playing to the crowd. We have evidence that she has been erratic, paranoiac. She claims my client, a pillar of this community, is abusive. It is a classic case of gold digger's remorse, Your Honor. She trapped a wealthy man, got pregnant, and is now trying to cash out. Marcus smirked, tapping his pen on the table. Judge Sterling stared at Pims for a long, uncomfortable silence. She didn't blink. And you, Mr. Vance? She addressed Marcus directly. Do you agree with your counsel's assessment that your wife is merely a gold digger? Marcus stood up slowly. He flashed his famous, charming smile, the one that had graced the cover of Forbes. Your Honor, it pains me to say it. I loved Elena. I took her from nothing. I gave her a life most women only dream of. But mental illness is a tragedy. She imagines things. She hurts herself to blame me. I just want my son to be safe. Elena couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "He's lying," she cried out, her voice trembling. "He threw a vase at me last week." "Look at the bruise." "On my arm." She tried to roll up her sleeve, but Sarah pulled her down. "Sit down, Elena, please," Sarah begged. "Order," Judge Sterling said calmly, but her eyes were locked on Elena's shaking hands. "Mrs. Vance, you will have your turn. Mr. Pims, proceed." As Pims continued to assassinate Elena's character, listing exaggerated spending habits and fabricated outbursts, Marcus leaned back, feeling victorious. He looked at the judge. She was writing furiously on her notepad. Good, Marcus thought. She's buying it. He had no idea that Judge Margaret Sterling wasn't taking notes on the legal arguments. She was writing down dates. She was looking at Elena's face, the shape of her nose, the curve of her chin, and comparing it to a memory she had buried 25 years ago. The trap was being set, but for the first time in his life, Marcus Vance wasn't the one holding the lever. The morning session dragged on for 2 hours, a slow and agonizing public execution of Elena's reputation. Arthur Pims was relentless. He produced evidence that was nothing more than manipulated context. A photo of Elena drinking wine. It was grape juice at a gala. A receipt for expensive jewelry, which Marcus had bought for his mistress, but charged to Elena's account. Elena sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. She felt the heavy gaze of the judge on her constantly. It wasn't a warm gaze. It was intense, calculating. Elena felt like a specimen under a microscope. She hates me too, Elena thought despairingly. She looks at me like I'm a mess. Just like Marcus says. Your Honor, Sarah Jenkins finally stood up, her voice shaky but determined. We would like to submit into evidence the police report from January 14th. Pims jumped up. Objection, that report was withdrawn. It was withdrawn because Mr. Vance threatened to evict Mrs. Vance's elderly aunt from her nursing home if she didn't recant. Sarah shouted, finally losing her temper. Hearsay! Pims roared. Sustained, Judge Sterling said. Her voice was flat. Ms. Jenkins, unless you have proof of coercion, the withdrawn report is inadmissible. Marcus chuckled audibly. He leaned over to Elena, speaking just loud enough for her to hear, but quiet enough to miss the court reporter's microphone. Give up, Elle. You're embarrassing yourself. Even this old hag of a judge knows you're trash. Elena stiffened. Is there something you wish to share with the class, Mr. Vance? Judge Sterling asked. She hadn't looked up from her papers, but her tone was razor sharp. Marcus stood, smoothing his suit. My apologies, Your Honor. I was just imploring my wife to stop this charade for the sake of her health. This stress. It's not good for the baby. Judge Sterling slowly took off her glasses. She placed them on the desk. You seem very concerned about the child, Mr. Vance. He is my heir, Marcus said, puffing out his chest. My legacy. And the mother? Sterling asked. Is she part of your legacy? She is the vessel, Marcus said, choosing his words with arrogant carelessness. A vessel that has unfortunately become defective. A gasp went through the courtroom. Even Pims winced. You didn't call a woman a defective vessel in front of a female judge. But Judge Sterling didn't explode. She didn't scold him. She just stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin white line. She looked at Elena. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, I have a question for you. Not legal. Personal? Elena stood up, using the table for support. Yes, Your Honor. Where are your parents? The question hung in the air, heavy and strange. Elena looked down at her shoes. My father died when I was 10. And my mother, her voice broke. My mother left when I was 4. I don't know her. I grew up in foster care until my aunt took me in. Marcus rolled his eyes. Here comes the orphan sob story, he muttered. Judge Sterling's hands, resting on the bench, clenched so hard her knuckles turned white. She left when you were 4? Yes, ma'am. My father said she chose her career over us. She moved to Europe. She didn't want a child holding her back. Elena wiped a tear. That's why I wanted this marriage to work so badly. I wanted my son to have a family, to stay together. I didn't want to be like my mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Sterling looked as if she had been slapped. Her composure cracked. Just for a second. Her eyes shimmered with a wetness she quickly blinked away. "I see," the judge whispered. Her voice sounded strained. "Your Honor," Pims interjected, sensing a shift in the mood. "This family history is tragic, really, but irrelevant to the prenup. We ask for a summary judgment." "Denied," Sterling snapped, her voice suddenly returning with ferocious power. "We will proceed to cross-examination." It was then that Marcus decided he had had enough. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way. He wasn't used to waiting. He was hungry, he was bored, and he wanted to go back to his office to close a deal with the Japanese investors. He stood up, ignoring his lawyer's frantic gesture to sit down. "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted. "I am Marcus Vance. I employ half this city. I built this skyline. And I am being lectured by a bitter old woman and lied to by a trailer trash whore." "Mr. Vance!" The bailiff moved forward. "Sit down." Marcus turned on Elena, his face turning red with rage. The mask was slipping. The charming billionaire was gone, replaced by the monster Elena lived with. "You think you can humiliate me? You think you can take my money?" He stepped away from his table, moving toward Elena. "Marcus, stop!" Pims shouted. But Marcus was in a blind fury. He saw the fear in Elena's eyes, the same fear he thrived on at home, and he wanted to crush it. He forgot where he was. He forgot the cameras. He forgot the judge. "You are nothing," Marcus screamed, standing just inches from her. "You are a parasite, and as soon as you push that kid out, I'm going to throw you in the gutter where you belong." Elena, trembling, looked up at him and finally found a spark of courage. "I'd rather be in the gutter than in your bed." That was the trigger. Marcus's hand came up. It was a reflex born of habit, of months of behind-closed-doors abuse. He didn't think. He just swung. Slap! The sound was sickeningly loud. Elena's head snapped to the side. She stumbled back, her hip hitting the heavy wooden table, and she cried out in pain, clutching her stomach. The courtroom went dead silent. The cameras stopped clicking for 1 second of pure shock before erupting into a frenzy. Marcus stood there, his hand still raised, breathing heavily. He blinked, suddenly realizing what he had done. He looked around. The bailiffs were rushing him. Pims had his face in his hands, but the most terrifying sound was the scrape of the high-backed leather chair on the dais. Judge Margaret Sterling was standing. She wasn't looking at the bailiffs. She wasn't looking at the lawyers. She was looking at Marcus, and her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She ripped the gavel off its block and threw it, across the room, smashing a water pitcher next to Marcus. "Don't you move," she growled. It wasn't a judicial order. It was a threat. She descended from the bench, her black robes billowing like the wings of an avenging angel. She didn't walk. She marched. She walked right past the bailiffs, right past the stunned lawyers, and stood toe-to-toe with Marcus Vance. She was smaller than him, but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. "You think you are a god because you have money," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you can hit a pregnant woman in my court?" "She provoked me," Marcus stammered, trying to regain his arrogance but failing. "You saw it. She—" "Shut up!" Sterling screamed, her voice echoing off the rafters. She turned to Elena. Sarah was helping Elena into a chair. Elena was holding her cheek, weeping softly. Judge Sterling looked at Elena's face. She reached out a trembling hand, hovering near Elena's cheek but not touching it. Then she turned back to Marcus. "You mentioned a legacy, Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "You mentioned family history." She reached up and pulled the pins from her hair. The steel-gray locks fell around her shoulders. She took off her glasses. "Look at me," she commanded Marcus. Marcus looked. He frowned. There was something familiar in the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. He looked at the judge. Then he looked at Elena. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The eyes, the high cheekbones. No, Marcus whispered. "That's impossible. Her mother is in Europe. Her mother didn't care." "Her mother," Judge Sterling said, tears finally spilling down her iron face, "was told her daughter died in a car accident 20 years ago. Her mother was told by a lying ex-husband that there was nothing left to come back for." She turned to the stunned courtroom. "I am not just the judge," she announced, her voice breaking. "I am Margaret Sterling, and that woman," she pointed to Elena, "is my daughter." She turned back to a pale, shaking Marcus Vance. "And you son of a bitch, have just slapped the daughter of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." The courtroom dissolved into absolute pandemonium. The bailiffs, usually sluggish, moved with the speed of linebackers. Two of them slammed Marcus Vance onto the table he had just stood behind. His face was pressed against the polished mahogany, his arm twisted behind his back. "Get your hands off me!" Marcus screamed, spitting flecks of saliva. "Do you know who I am? I'll sue this entire city. This is a setup, a mistrial. Get him out of my sight." Judge Sterling Margaret commanded. She didn't shout this time. Her voice was cold, deadly steel. "Book him for aggravated assault in the presence of a judicial officer and contempt of court. No bail until he sees a magistrate." As they dragged the billionaire away, kicking and cursing, the gallery erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Camera flashes were blinding, but Margaret saw none of it. She moved toward Elena. Elena was slumped in the chair, Sarah Jenkins holding her up. The red imprint of Marcus's hand was already blooming angrily on Elena's pale cheek. She looked up at the woman in the black robes, the woman she had feared just minutes ago, with wide, confused eyes. "Mom?" Elena whispered, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. You're really—" Margaret's judicial armor crumbled completely. She dropped to her knees on the dirty courtroom floor, heedless of her robes, heedless of the cameras that were still rolling before the bailiffs could clear the room. She reached out and took Elena's trembling hands. "Oh, Ellie!" Margaret sobbed, using a nickname Elena hadn't heard since she was a toddler. "My beautiful Ellie, I thought you were gone." "But Dad said—" Elena winced, clutching her stomach as a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. "Dad said you left. He said you chose your job. He said you didn't want a baby dragging you down." Margaret's face twisted in agony. "He lied. Your father. David was a jealous man, Elena. When I got the clerkship in D.C., he couldn't handle my success. We fought. I went ahead to set up our house, and when I came back for you two, weeks later, the house was empty." Margaret brushed a tear from Elena's face, her thumb tracing the bruise Marcus had left. "He disappeared," Margaret continued, her voice trembling. "I spent every dollar I had on private investigators. 2 years later, I received a letter from a coroner in Ohio. A car accident. It said David and Elena Sterling were dead. There were death certificates. They were real official documents. He changed my name." Elena realized, her breath coming in short gasps. "When we moved, he changed it to Elena Miller. He told me it was to hide from creditors, but he was hiding from you. He forged the death certificates," Margaret realized, a dark fury rising in her eyes. "He faked your death to punish me, to keep you from me." Suddenly, Elena cried out, a guttural sound of pain. She doubled over, gripping Margaret's arm so hard her nails dug into the fabric of the robe. "The baby!" Sarah Jenkins shouted. "She's going into labor!" Margaret snapped back into command mode. She stood up, her face wet with tears but her voice booming. "Clear the hallway! I need a paramedic in here now!" She looked down at her daughter, fierce protectiveness flooding her veins. "You are not going to that trailer park, Elena, and you are not going back to that monster. You're coming with me." As the paramedics rushed in with a stretcher, lifting the groaning Elena onto it, Arthur Pims, Marcus's lawyer, was frantically packing his briefcase. He tried to slip out the side door. "Mr. Pims." Margaret's voice stopped him cold. He turned, looking pale. "Your Honor, I had no idea about the relation. This is obviously a conflict of interest. I will be filing a motion for recusal." "You do that," Margaret said, walking up to him until she was inches from his face. "But know this. You just watched your client assault a pregnant woman in open court. If you try to spin this, if you try to hurt her one more time, I will make it my life's mission to disbar you. I will dig through every case you've ever won, every settlement you've ever coerced, and I will find the dirt. And we both know, Arthur, there is plenty of dirt." Pym swallowed hard, nodded once, and fled. Margaret turned back to the stretcher. She took Elena's hand. "I'm here, Ellie. Mama's here. I'm not letting go this time." The private wing of St. Jude's Hospital was locked down tighter than a maximum security prison. 2 off-duty police officers, hired personally by Margaret, stood outside room 402. Inside, the air was filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the exhausted breathing of a new mother. Elena lay in the bed, looking pale but radiant. In her arms, swaddled in a blue blanket, was a tiny, red-faced infant, Leo. He had arrived 3 weeks early, weighing only 5 pounds, but he was a fighter. He had his mother's nose and, unfortunately, his father's chin. Margaret sat in the chair next to the bed. She had finally changed out of her robes into a crisp business suit. But she looked exhausted. She hadn't slept in 30 hours. She just watched them, as if blinking would make them disappear. "He looks like you," Elena whispered, running a finger over Leo's soft cheek. "He looks like trouble," Margaret smiled softly. "Just like you were." The moment was shattered by the ring of Margaret's phone. She checked the screen. It was the Chief Justice. She sighed. "I have to take this," she whispered. She stepped out into the hallway. "Margaret," the Chief Justice's voice was grave. "We have a problem." "I know," Margaret said, rubbing her temples. "I failed to disclose a familial relationship. But I didn't know, John. I swear." "I believe you," the Chief Justice said, "but the media is having a field day. The long-lost daughter of the Iron Judge. It's a fairy tale to some, but to Vance's legal team, it's a weapon. What have they done? Marcus made bail an hour ago." Margaret's blood ran cold. "Bail! He assaulted me. He assaulted a witness." "He has the best lawyers money can buy," John sighed. "They argued that he was provoked by a biased judge who was concealing a conflict of interest. They are painting you as the villain, Margaret. They claim you and your daughter conspired to entrap him to break the prenup." "That's insane," Margaret snapped. "It's effective. They filed an emergency motion to remove you from the case, which is automatic, obviously, but they are also filing for immediate custody of the child." "On what grounds?" Margaret demanded, her voice rising. "On the grounds that Elena is homeless, unemployed, and mentally unstable, and that her only support system, you, is currently under investigation for judicial misconduct." Margaret almost dropped the phone. "Investigation? Vance's team filed a complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board. Until it's cleared, Margaret, you're suspended. You have no power." Margaret hung up the phone, her hand shaking. She looked through the glass of the door at Elena and baby Leo. They had reunited, yes, but in doing so, they had handed Marcus Vance the exact weapon he needed. By revealing she was the mother, Margaret had inadvertently destroyed the legal protection she could have offered. She was no longer the judge. She was just a grandmother with a suspended license and a very rich, very angry enemy. Across town, in the penthouse of the Vance Global Tower, Marcus Vance was nursing a scotch and a bruised ego. He paced the floor, looking out over the city rain. Arthur Pym sat on the velvet sofa, looking nervous. "We have the narrative set," Pym said. "The press loves a conspiracy. The secret daughter angle makes it look like you were walked into a trap. The assault? We're spinning it as a reactive defense to emotional distress caused by their lies." "I don't care about the PR," Marcus spat, turning around. "I want my son, and I want that woman destroyed, both of them." "The custody hearing is set for tomorrow morning," Pym said. "New judge, Judge Frederick Thorne." Marcus stopped pacing. A slow, wicked smile spread across his face. "Thorne? Freddie Thorne? You know him? I played golf with him at the country club last month. Marcus chuckled darkly. He owes me a favor. I tipped him off about that biotech stock before it crashed. Saved him $500,000. Pims hesitated. Marcus, be careful. If anyone finds out... No one finds out, Marcus snapped. Thorne is a traditionalist. He believes a child belongs with a provider. He hates emotional women. We walk in there tomorrow. We play the victim. We show that Elena has no house and no money, and we take the kid. And the assault charge? We pay Elena off, Marcus shrugged. Once I have the kid, she'll do anything. I'll offer her $1 million to drop the charges and disappear. She'll take it. She's weak. Marcus walked to the window, pressing his hand against the glass. She thought finding her mommy would save her, he whispered to the rain. She just made it so much more fun to win. The following morning, the atmosphere in the courthouse was vastly different. Gone was the righteous fury of Judge Sterling's courtroom. In its place was the sterile, cold efficiency of courtroom 2A, presided over by Judge Frederick Thorne. Thorne was a heavy-set man with a red face and a bored expression. He didn't look at people, he looked at papers. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table, looking frail. She had checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice to be here. She wore a suit Margaret had bought her that morning. It was expensive, structured, but it couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. Margaret sat in the gallery behind the bar. As a witness and a suspended judge, she couldn't sit at the table. She had to watch from the sidelines, powerless. Marcus sat on the other side, looking refreshed, wearing a navy suit that shouted, "Responsible father." "We are here regarding the emergency custody of the infant, Leo Vance," Judge Thorne mumbled. "Mr. Pims, you have the floor." "Your Honor," Pims began, his voice smooth as oil. "We have a simple case here. My client, Marcus Vance, is a billionaire industrialist with a stable home, a team of nannies, and the financial means to provide the best life possible. The mother, Elena Vance, is currently residing, well, she has no residence. She is staying in a guest room of a woman she just met yesterday. Her biological mother, yes, but a stranger nonetheless. We object." Sarah Jenkins stood up. "Mrs. Vance is staying with Judge Sterling, a pillar of the justice system." A suspended judge, Pims corrected with a sneer. "Currently under investigation for judicial misconduct regarding this very case. Is that really a stable environment for a newborn? A house under siege by the media? A house owned by a woman facing potential disbarment?" Judge Thorne nodded slowly. "Point noted. Ms. Jenkins, does your client have independent income?" "She was a stay-at-home mother, Your Honor. Mr. Vance controlled all the finances." "So she is destitute," Thorne summarized. "And she has a history of mental instability?" "Fabricated history," Sarah argued. "We have the medical reports from the hospital right here. The stress of the abuse caused the early labor." "Alleged abuse," Thorne corrected. "Mr. Vance has not been convicted of anything yet. In this country, Ms. Jenkins, we are innocent until proven guilty." Margaret bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. She saw what was happening. It was a railroad job. Thorne was ignoring the video evidence of the slap because it hadn't been fully processed into the new docket yet. He was focusing purely on financial stability. "I have heard enough," Judge Thorne said, checking his watch. He clearly had a tea time to make. "But Mrs. Vance hasn't testified," Sarah protested. "I don't need to hear weeping," Thorne snapped. "I look at the facts. The father can provide. The mother cannot. The mother is relying on a third party who is currently compromised." He banged his gavel once. "Temporary sole custody is awarded to Mr. Marcus Vance. Mrs. Vance is granted supervised visitation 2 hours a week, pending a psychological evaluation. Law enforcement is authorized to facilitate the transfer of the infant by 5 p.m. today," Elena screamed. It was a raw, animal sound of heartbreak. "No, you can't. He's breastfeeding. He needs me." "Court is adjourned," Thorne said, standing up and walking out without looking back. Marcus turned to Elena. He didn't smile. He just checked his cufflinks. "Have him ready by 5, Elena. If you're late, I'll have you arrested for kidnapping." He walked out, Pims trailing behind him. Margaret jumped the rail and grabbed Elena, who was hyperventilating. "He took him," Elena gasped, clutching Margaret's lapels. "Mom, he took him. He's going to hurt him." "He won't hurt him," Margaret said, her voice shaking with a rage she had never felt before. "He wants the baby as a trophy. But he made a mistake." "What mistake?" Sarah Jenkins asked, packing her files with trembling hands. "Thorne is untouchable. He has tenure." Margaret looked at the door where Judge Thorne had exited. Her eyes were dry now. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. "Thorne thinks he's untouchable because he plays by the old boys' rules," Margaret said. "He thinks I'm just a suspended judge. He forgot who I was before I was a judge." "Who were you?" Elena asked. "I was a prosecutor," Margaret said darkly. "And I was the one who investigated the syndicate back in the 90s. She pulled out her phone. Marcus played dirty. He used money and influence. But he forgot one thing. Everyone has secrets, especially men like Frederick Thorne." Margaret dialed a number she hadn't called in 20 years. "Hello?" a gruff voice answered. "It's Margaret," she said. "I need a favor, Frank. Remember that file on the Thorne family we buried in 98? The one about the offshore accounts and the hit and run?" There was a silence on the line. "I remember," the voice said. "Dig it up," Margaret commanded. "I'm going to war." She turned to Elena. "We aren't giving him that baby, Elena." "But the police—" "Let them come," Margaret said. "By 5 p.m., Judge Thorne is going to wish he had never learned to play golf." But as they walked out of the courthouse, a black van screeched to a halt in front of them. The side door slid open. It wasn't the police. 3 men in masks jumped out. Before Margaret could even scream, they grabbed Elena. "No!" Margaret shouted, swinging her heavy briefcase at one of the men, striking him in the head. He grunted but shoved her hard, sending her sprawling onto the concrete. "Mom!" Elena screamed as they dragged her into the van. "Tell Marcus he can have the custody order." One of the masked men growled at Margaret as she lay on the ground. "But if he wants his wife alive to sign the divorce papers, he better stop digging into the judge's past." The van tires squealed, leaving a cloud of burnt rubber smoke. Margaret lay on the pavement, her knee bleeding, her heart hammering against her ribs. They had taken her daughter again. But this time, Margaret didn't just have the law. She had nothing left to lose. She slowly picked herself up, her eyes burning with a terrifying fire. "You want a villain, Marcus?" she whispered to the empty street. "I'll show you a villain." The pavement was wet and cold against Margaret Sterling's cheek, but the pain in her bleeding knee was nothing compared to the fire in her chest. She pushed herself up, ignoring the concerned onlookers rushing to help her. "Call 911!" a woman shouted. "No!" Margaret rasped, dusting off her torn suit. "They won't get there in time. And if Thorne is involved, the dispatch is likely flagged." She limped to her car, her mind racing with the clarity that only comes from total desperation. They had taken Elena. They thought this would break her. They thought kidnapping the daughter would force the mother to stand down. They didn't know Margaret Sterling. She got into her car and locked the doors. Her hands were steady as she dialed Frank's number again. "They took her, Frank. Black van. No plates. Heading east toward the industrial district." "I'm on it." Frank's voice was gravelly. "I'm pinging the traffic cams. Margaret, if Thorne is behind this, he's using cleaners. These guys aren't cops. They're mercenaries. If we go in heavy. I don't care if we have to burn the city down," Margaret said, starting the engine. "Meet me at Thorne's residence. I'm not chasing the van. I'm going for the head of the snake." 30 minutes later, the Thorne residence judge, Frederick Thorne, lived in a gated community in Bellevue, a fortress of wealth and privilege. He was currently in his study, pouring a glass of expensive cognac, his hand trembling slightly. He had just authorized a kidnapping. It was supposed to be a protective hold. Just keep the girl quiet until the custody transfer was complete and the mother was disbarred. But things were spiraling. The front door exploded inward. Thorne dropped his glass, shattering it on the hardwood floor. He scrambled back as Margaret Sterling marched into his hallway, flanked by Frank, a massive man in a trench coat holding a tire iron, and two other men who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast. "Margaret!" Thorne shrieked. "Are you insane? This is breaking and entering. I'll have you arrested." Margaret didn't stop until she slammed her hands onto his desk, leaning over him like a predator. "You already tried to have me killed, Freddie, or at least hurt, so let's cut the legal mumbo-jumbo." She pulled a thick manila folder from her briefcase and threw it on his desk. Photos spilled out. Photos of Thorne on a yacht with known money launderers. Bank statements from the Cayman Islands. A police report of a hit-and-run from 1998 that had been buried by a corrupt DA. "I called in every favor I had," Margaret hissed. "I have the wire transfers, Fred. The money Marcus Vance paid you to fix the custody hearing, it's all here. Traceable. I have already sent a copy to the FBI and the State Attorney General. The upload finishes in 10 minutes. Thorne turned pale, his sweat glistening on his forehead. "Margaret. Listen. Vance. He pressured me. He said he'd ruin me." "He owns you," Margaret corrected. "But now, I own you. And unless you want to spend the rest of your life in a federal prison cell being traded for cigarettes, you are going to tell me exactly where they took my daughter." Thorne stammered, looking at the phone, then at Frank's tire iron. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Marcus just wanted her scared. They took her to the old shipyard, Warehouse 4. Vance is meeting them there. He wants to force her to sign a confession saying she's unfit, video record it, and then what? Margaret screamed. "Then stage a suicide," Thorne whispered, burying his face in his hands. The air left the room. A staged suicide. It was the perfect cleanup. A depressed, unstable mother loses custody and takes her own life. Marcus keeps the billions, the baby, and the sympathy of the public. Margaret grabbed Thorne by his tie and yanked his face close to hers. "Call your dogs off," she ordered, "and then pray to whatever God you believe in that my daughter has not a single scratch on her. Because if she does, I won't just send you to prison. I will make sure you never sleep soundly again." She turned to Frank. "Shipyard, Warehouse 4, move!" As they ran back to the car, Margaret's phone pinged. It was a text from Sarah Jenkins, the lawyer. "Margaret, where are you?" "Marcus is at the hospital with private security. He's taking the baby. The nurses can't stop him. He has the court order." Margaret froze. It was a two-pronged attack. Marcus was securing the air while his goons disposed of the mother. "Frank," Margaret said, her voice deadly calm. "You take the team to the warehouse. Get Elena. Use lethal force if you have to." "Where are you going?" Frank asked, revving the engine of his truck. Margaret got into her sedan. "I'm going to get my grandson." The scene at St. Jude's Hospital was chaos. Marcus Vance, flanked by 4 armed private security guards, was storming down the maternity ward hallway. Nurses were shouting. Security guards were arguing. But Marcus held the court order signed by Judge Thorne like a shield. "This is a legal document!" Marcus shouted at the head nurse, a formidable woman named Brenda. "Interfere, and I will buy this hospital just to fire you. You cannot move a premature infant without a doctor's discharge." Brenda shouted back, blocking the door to the nursery. "Move her!" Marcus signaled his guards. One of the guards stepped forward and shoved Brenda aside. Marcus pushed open the doors. There, in the incubator, lay Leo. "Finally," Marcus sneered. "Daddy's here." He reached into the incubator. "Get away from him!" Marcus turned. Margaret Sterling stood at the end of the hallway. She was alone. She was limping. Her suit was torn, her hair wild. She looked nothing like a judge. She looked like a grandmother prepared to die. "You!" Marcus laughed. "You're persistent. I'll give you that. But you're too late." Thorne signed the order. "The law is on my side." The law? Margaret walked forward, her heels clicking on the linoleum. You think the law is a piece of paper? You think it's a gavel? The law is justice, Marcus, and justice is coming. Get her out of here, Marcus ordered his guards. Two large men moved toward Margaret. Stop! A booming voice echoed from the elevators. The elevator doors opened, and 6 uniformed FBI agents poured out, guns drawn. Behind them was the district attorney. FBI, drop your weapons. Marcus's guards hesitated, then slowly raised their hands. They were paid mercenaries, not martyrs. Marcus looked around, confused. What is this? I have a court order. That order is void, the district attorney announced, stepping forward. Judge Frederick Thorne was just arrested 5 minutes ago for bribery, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and racketeering. His orders are null and void. Marcus's face went white. Kidnapping? I didn't kidnap anyone. We have a confession from your driver, Margaret said, walking right up to Marcus until she was chest to chest with him. Frank just pulled him out of Warehouse 4. He's very talkative when he's in pain. Marcus backed up, hitting the incubator. You can't prove I knew. Elena is on the phone. Margaret held up her cell phone. She's safe, and she heard everything you said to your men over the radio. Marcus looked at the phone, then at the FBI agents, then at Margaret. The walls were closing in. The billions in his account couldn't buy his way out of federal kidnapping charges. He lunged. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He grabbed a scalpel from a nearby medical tray and grabbed Margaret, pulling her in front of him as a human shield, the blade at her throat. Back off! Marcus screamed, his eyes wild. I'm walking out of here with the baby! Anyone follows and the judge dies. The FBI agents froze, their guns trained on Marcus's head. Marcus, don't do this, the district attorney shouted. It's over! It's not over until I say it is, Marcus spat. I am Marcus Vance. I win. I always win. Margaret felt the cold steel against her neck. She could smell Marcus's fear, the sweat, the scotch, the desperation. She wasn't afraid. She was just angry. She remembered the slap in the courtroom. She remembered Elena's face. She remembered 20 years of missed birthdays because of men like him. You know, Marcus, Margaret said calmly. Shut up, he screamed. You made one mistake in your research, she continued. You looked up my judicial record. You didn't look up my hobbies. What? Margaret stomped her heel down with all her force onto Marcus's instep, crushing the small bones of his foot. As he screamed and reflexively loosened his grip, she grabbed his wrist, twisted it using a Krav Maga disarming technique she had practiced for a decade, and snapped his arm back. The scalpel clattered to the floor. Margaret didn't stop. She spun around, driving her elbow into his nose with a sickening crunch. Marcus Vance, the billionaire CEO, crumbled to the floor, blood pouring from his face. Margaret stood over him, straightening her jacket. I take self-defense classes on Tuesdays, she said coldly. The FBI agent swarmed Marcus, cuffing him as he groaned in pain. Margaret turned to the nursery window. Inside, baby Leo was sleeping soundly, unaware that his grandmother had just taken down a tycoon to save him. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed, but this time the atmosphere was respectful. Quiet. Marcus Vance sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit. His head was shaved, his arrogance gone. He looked aged, hollow. He had pleaded guilty to kidnapping, assault, bribery, and attempted murder to avoid a life sentence without parole. He was sentenced to 30 years. Vance Global stocks had crashed, the board had fired him, and his assets were frozen to pay for the massive civil suit Elena had filed. On the plaintiff's bench sat Elena Sterling. She looked different. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob. She wore a tailored cream suit, and she held her head high. She wasn't the scared girl in the maternity dress anymore. She was the owner of a new foundation, helping victims of domestic abuse. And in her arms was Leo, a chubby, happy 6-month-old baby. But the real attention was on the bench. Judge Margaret Sterling sat in the high chair. She had been reinstated with honors after the investigation cleared her name and exposed the corruption ring led by Thorne. She looked down at Marcus one last time. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice echoing with the authority of the ages. "You spent your life building a legacy of money. You thought that made you powerful. You thought people were assets to be owned." She looked at Elena and Leo. "You failed to realize that the only legacy that matters is love. And the strength of a mother." She banged the gavel. "This court grants full, permanent sole custody to Elena Sterling. You are stripped of all parental rights. Officers, take him away." As Marcus was dragged out, he didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just looked at Elena, who didn't even blink. She was looking at her mother. Margaret smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. Elena stood up and mouthed the words, "Thank you." They met outside the courthouse steps. The sun was shining. A rare, beautiful Seattle day. The rain had finally stopped. "So," Elena said, bouncing Leo on her hip, "lunch?" "I know a place that doesn't require a reservation," Margaret laughed, taking Leo's tiny hand in hers. "Actually, I was thinking we go home. I have 20 years of photo albums to show you." "I'd like that," Elena said. They walked down the steps together, 3 generations of Sterlings, leaving the shadow of the courthouse behind them, stepping into a future that was finally, truly their own. And that is the story of how a single slap in a courtroom brought down an empire and reunited a family. It reminds us that no amount of money can buy justice when a mother's love is on the line. What did you think of Judge Sterling's reaction? Would you have done the same if you were in her shoes? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you never miss a new story. We have more shocking courtroom dramas coming next week. Thanks for watching.